Thank you. That was beautiful. And pointing out they are live musicians back here. I had someone last Sunday afterwards say, that pre-recorded thing you did was amazing. I don't know how you push that button, but I had to inform them. They're like, wait, you got one person back there? Nope. We got four people, live people back here. It's amazing. I always get a chuckle when people assume that it's all pre-recorded or something. They're like, wait a second, does the shrub sing? No, we got people. You feel stuck with your debt if you can't budget. Budget. Every calendar's days are numbered. A lot of money is tainted. Taint yours, and it taint mine. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of reflection. It's actually borrowed from Father Richard Rohr, but he has this great discussion point that leads to, yes, we'll get salted with fire in a second, but God and mammon. God and mammon. What is mammon? We'll get to that, but this is the tension we all live with how much either our possessions control us or how that all works out, but here we go. Father Richard continues his reflections on money by considering one of Jesus' most challenging statements. Many of us, including myself, have a confused, guilt-ridden, obsessive attitude about money. There's hardly anyone who can think in a clear-headed way about it. At the end of Luke's parable of the so-called dishonest steward, Jesus creates a clear dualism between God and wealth, or what he calls mammon. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon was the god of wealth, money, superficiality, and success. Jesus says, in effect, you've finally got to make a choice. Most of Jesus' teaching is what I call non-dual, a theme I often teach. But there are a few areas where he's absolutely dualistic, either or. And it's usually anything having to do with power and anything having to do with money. Jesus is absolute about money and power because he knows what we're going to do. Most of us will serve this god called mammon. Luke's gospel even describes mammon as a type of illness, as Jesuit John Haughey explained. Mammon is not simply a neutral term in Luke. It is not simply money. It connotes disorder. Mammon becomes then a source of disorder because people allow it to make a claim on them that only God can make. Mammon illness takes over when we think all of life is counting, weighing, measuring, and deserving. We go to places that have sales so that we don't have to give as much to get the same thing. My mother spent so much time cutting coupons to save 10 cents. It was good and even necessary for a while, I guess, but it's very hard to get rid of that fixation. To participate in the reign of God, we have to stop counting. We have to stop weighing, measuring, and deserving in order to let the flow of forgiveness and love to flow through us. The love of God can't be doled out by any process whatsoever. We can't earn it. We can't lose it. As long as we stay in this world of earning and losing, we'll live in perpetual resentment, envy, or climbing. Religion cannot work from a calculator without losing its very method, mind, foundation, and source. Surely this is what Jesus meant in his statement in Luke's gospel. Perhaps if we say it a bit differently, we can all get the point. You cannot move around inside the world of infinite grace and mercy and at the same time be counting and measuring with your overly defensive and finite little mind. It would be like asking an ant to map the galaxies. St. Therese of Lisieux put it much more directly, to a nun worried about God keeping track of her many failings. She said, "There is a science about which God knows nothing. Addition. The reign of God is a worldview of abundance. God lifts us up from a worldview of scarcity to infinity. Remember, every part of infinity is still infinite. God's love is nothing less than infinite." Now that last line, I want to just pause there, put a pin in that one. God's love is nothing less than infinite. And I also have to point out another great part of this reflection. It is what Rohr describes as mammon illness, when it distorts our view of the world. Mammon illness takes over when we think all life is counting, weighing, measuring, and deserving. Our life is already full of careful calculations, measurements. So feeling God's love in that same category as limited should not be part of that same equation. And yet we tend to fall into that camp, like we have to earn God's love. Take a moment to consider all the ways that we even use our language around divine love and wisdom as a form of transaction. This for that. It is not the way that a God of infinite abundance operates. Ultimately, it's all a gift. Everything. We don't deserve anything. It's all a gift. Until we have begun to live in the kingdom of God instead of the kingdoms of this world, we will think exactly like the world. To understand the gospel and its radical transformative power, we have to stop counting, measuring, and weighing. We have to stop saying, "I deserve," and deciding who does not deserve. None of us deserve. This daily conversation is hard to do unless we've experienced infinite mercy and realize that it's all a gift, all the time. So wrapping our heads around this, around a God of the infinite, of abundant all the time, we can consider this in the natural world. We're surrounded by these trees. You can imagine they've been given enough water and sunlight. Does a tree ever wake up one day and decide, "I'm going to take today off. I'm not going to grow anymore"? Does the earth ever ask us for what we take from her? God as infinite abundance. The reign of God is infinite and infinite abundance. And just one last piece around reflecting on that, restating it. You cannot move around inside the world of infinite grace and mercy and at the same time be counting and measuring with your overly defensive and finite little mind. And it brings these other questions. Are we missing something in how we relate to both God and money? Is there more information that we can gain to understand this? And then this leads to other questions we're not going to resolve today, but ultimately this bigger question is, if we were given a substantial amount of wealth and money and all this, would that amplify or glorify God And how do we reconcile God's love that cannot be earned? God's love is given freely and abundantly to everyone without exception. And getting at that stopping of the counting, we get to Psalm 19 there. In the heavens he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom from his wedding canopy, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Now I would offer this. Resting in joy is a countercultural gift. It's even possible to be joyful without money. I've met plenty of them in the course of my life. And this is especially true when we take the wisdom of Psalm 19. If we set a tent for the sun to reside with us. Imagine setting a tent. Imagine that your house, your dwelling space. You invite the presence of the sun. It could be a metaphor, the S-O-N, the S-U-N, but it's heat, it's light, it's warmth that gives us and sustains us. And that emanation is true life. The ordinances of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and drippings of the honeycomb. All that is saying in a different way, a taste of the sacred is more satisfying, more lasting than gold, even much fine gold. And this is where we're going with restoring flavor in life. If life has lost its flavor, how do we restore that? How do we restore that in our lives? Jesus begins by warning us not to place stumbling blocks before children. And then he gives us warnings about our natural cravings causing us to sin, including some very graphic descriptions of our hands, our legs, and even our eyes being removed if they are getting in the way, if they are not keeping us on track. Now, of course, Jesus is speaking always from the eternal perspective, from the infinite, and the transition from this physical dimension to eternity. So yes, in that dimension, in that perspective, from the eternal realm, it is quite graphic. The severing of hands, limbs, eyes even. He's getting to a point. The difference between doing things in this world that are not good, that we perhaps even know are not good, and where those are taking us on the deeper, more eternal route. Anything that is a stumbling block to accessing the sacred, that spiritual dimension to life, get rid of it. It no longer serves us. Now, Jesus also provides a recipe for all of us. And yes, it includes a whole lot of salt. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how can you season it? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. So what does it mean to be salted with fire? And what does it mean to have salt in ourselves? And maybe we've used that phrase, that person was a salty person, and maybe that was colorful language or something. We've used salt in language in ways that we associate it with throwing salt over a shoulder, being worth your salt, throwing salt in someone's game. I'm taking you back in time, historically here. By the time of the Hebrew book of Ezra, 550 to 450 BCE, salt from a person was synonymous with drawing sustenance, taking pay, or being in that person's service. At the time, salt production was strictly controlled by the monarchy or ruling elite, explaining their loyalty variously as, because we are salted with the salt of the palace. And then we go with salarium. The Roman word salarium linked employment, salt. Alternatively, the Roman historian Pliny the Elder stated as an aside in his Natural History's discussion of seawater that in Rome, the soldier's pay was originally salt, and the word for salary derives from it. It gave rise to those expressions of being worth one's salt. And the European superstition holds that spilling salt is an evil omen. And one widespread explanation of the belief that it's unlucky to spill salt was that Judas Iscariot spilled the salt of the Last Supper. Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper depicts Judas Iscariot having knocked over the salt cellar. The most common contemporary belief requires you to toss a pinch of salt over your left shoulder at the devil who lurks there, throwing salt in the devil's face. Well, let's bring this all home here. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? I'm going to go into a story here. There was a Roman Catholic priest. I was doing a memorial service. It was his brother that had passed away, and he gave probably the best description of how to restore salt in our lives that I've heard to date. And he went into the ancient ways of salt and how in the ancient world when you would have some salt, as it was a rare thing, and salary. We earn salaries in our livelihood, right? That salt was one of the ways that you could restore flavor in group settings, and that one person in the group would inevitably be carrying the salt in a bag that would filter out some of the other things that were there, because salt was usually there with some dirt. And this person, if there was a big cauldron or something where people were going to be eating, this specialized bag would be thrown in there. And if it's a good bag, it's going to filter out that which is dirt and only let the salt infuse into the community meal. And over time, some of that salt will diffuse into the food. It'll give flavor. It provides sustenance. And over time, eventually, that salt will go out into the world, into people. It has given flavor. It has given life. It has given zest. And what is left at the end is a bag of dirt. And so his lesson was, don't be a dirt bag. Well, it's a true story. He got some humor out of it. And it was his brother's funeral. But it's true about bringing flavor and having salt within that which we provide. And if you take that to the spiritual sense, it is embracing God's abundance, given freely, all the time, in infinite ways. Have flavor and salt within us so that we can also give freely, because we are reflecting the nature of God, who gave and who gives without measure. Now we're going through trials presently in life. We are being salted by fire. It's forging our character and resolve to try and remain living and loving from this divine light. Life is also forcing us to restore that which is tasty and good. When we not only seek out, find, we are brought into a new awareness of the nature of God that is filled with grace and mercy that we did not earn. More to be desired than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, drippings of the honeycomb. The good news is that we are all being led in a direction that is far more real bringing us more salt to share. So the invitation this morning is to recommit ourselves anew this day to the living God, to redeem our hearts, our minds, our souls, and to witness how the Lord is opening new doors. Some have shut, other ones have opened. Some relations have changed and shifted, and new ones are emerging. To heal that illness that was once overwhelming, to shift and remove that which felt stale and outdated, replacing it with energy that is fresh, pristine, vibrant, and alive. Renew your commitment this moment. For until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help that one otherwise would have never occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance which no human could have dreamed would have come their way. Whatever you can dream, you can begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. May the Lord so help us all. Amen.